Um, Rita just commented and said I enjoyed a participation in the Ellen Hildebrand discussion a few weeks ago, and that was, in case anyone on here has not listened to that yet. I really enjoyed that conversation with her. I have a much greater respect for how much she knows about the weather and how it plays such a big part in her books. So if you're a fan of the books, or if you're not, if you're just a weather fan, either way, you're gonna like the books.
That was a fantastic conversation. That was so much fun to get to bring that literary element in to talk about the weather and to,
Yeah.
especially to have both Doug and Ellen in the same room. That was
Yes,
really
yes.
exciting.
The weather world is a small world for sure.
I just love how passionate everyone is about their weather stories and about sharing those with others. I love the connections that are created through those stories.
Yeah, yes, me too. We've got Carrollton, Georgia here. Kevin, hi. Let's see, Carmel, Indiana, which we were talking about on my show today. Northern Scotland, cold at present with some wintry showers. That was from Richard. Should I tell everyone what the temperature is here?
Yes,
69,
definitely.
69 degrees, December the 1st. Meteorological winter. Here we go in Atlanta. Tim from Maryland and Amy from Chattanooga. Paul in West Virginia and Gail in Tucson, where it's 75. Rita's from Alexandria, Virginia, but Brian is beating us all with temperatures in Redlands, California at 83. Chris is 70 in Boulder. Lima, Peru. Caesar, hello. Highland, New York. Astrid, who's looking forward to the mid 60s, or maybe not, just noting that it'll be mid 60s in DC. Jocelyn from King of Prussia, my old stomping grounds. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with Jen and her amazing work. So let's go ahead and dive into this conversation. So Jen, you've been with the Weather Channel for 20 years now?
23 years. Yep.
23 years.
23
That's
years.
incredible. So I'd love to just get some more information on what drew you to weather and how you got started there. I know you shared a little bit of that during our Ellen Hildebrand webinar, but yeah, just the basics. What got you into weather?
I was always into weather as far back as I can remember. And, as a kid, being a weather geek, I never really thought that it was going to be a job. I just thought I liked the weather. And I was curious about things and science and how things worked in general. And there wasn't one big storm like many meteorologists have, but I had lots of big storms that affected my life in different ways. There was a big snowstorm, blizzard of 1983. I grew up outside of the Philadelphia area in the suburbs, town called Collegeville, Pennsylvania. And I was a young kid. I remember big snow piles that were up to my head, as the driveway got shoveled. And that was just, awesome as a kid to enjoy and to play in. But I think that just sparked my curiosity, like, wow, okay, are all snowstorms going to be like this? And every other subsequent weather event that I was a part of, I always had that same kind of feeling like, okay, why is that special? But Hurricane Gloria came through the Northeast and we had a hurricane day in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. And to me, that was so odd. When I thought of hurricanes, I thought of Florida. I was in the 4th grade at the time. And I remember in the garage of my friend's house, and we opened up the garage door a little bit because we thought it was dangerous outside. So we didn't go much more than that, but we just watched the rain all day. And I was like, what makes this hurricane rain so different? It looked like any other rain, but yet we got a day off of school for it. And so situations like that, there was a tornado in Limerick, Pennsylvania, not too far from my town. We had lots of hailstorms, as you get with thunderstorms. And every time it happened, in particular, the big events, my parents would be scrambling to get the cars in the garage and I'd be sitting there with my weather books like, huh, that one was up in the cloud for a while. And so it was all these kind of things. And then, cable happened in the 80s when I was growing up and the Weather Channel happened. And so that was no doubt a really big part of it because we got the Weather Channel and, my friends were watching the Smurfs. I was watching the Weather Channel and Jim Cantori and Mark Mancuso. And I learned a lot. And then in high school, I became a lifeguard. And I used my knowledge learned on the Weather Channel to figure out if I was going to have to work or not. Like if there was going to be high pressure, it was going to be a good day. It was going to be busy. People were going to be there. It would be hot and sunny. Low pressure meant a lousy day. And I learned that before I was even taught that, just by, sort of correlating the patterns. So it all just kind of worked together to when I went to high school. I had a teacher, Mr. Flango. He was my calculus teacher, and he had careers that you could do if you liked math in a crossword puzzle up on a bulletin board. And meteorology was one of them. And I was like, oh, I loved math, and this pulled it all together. And so, I mean, the rest is history. From there, I had other teachers that really helped cultivate my interest in weather and in meteorology, and went to Penn State, got my degree in meteorology, and went to the Weather Channel right after that. That's my background.
That's so fantastic. I've never heard of another like high school lifeguard who spent their time tracking the high and low pressure systems. I love that so much.
I will tell you that I was so into it that my boss at the pool got me a sling cyclometer. So
oh no way.
A little side note, my nickname at the Weather Channel has been the Dew Point Diva for years, because I've always had this weird obsession with dew points. And even back then, before I even really knew what dew points were, he knew that I needed this, because I was meticulous every day with the records, not just for the chlorine levels of the pool, but for the weather. And so I would also not just write down the temperature, but also the wet and dry bulb temperatures too. So I had a record of that for all the summers I worked at the pool.
That is so fantastic. So audience members, please join in at any time with your questions. Jen is really generously sharing her time with us just so we can learn more about her and her experiences. So we welcome your questions at any point through this conversation.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on all that learning you started with the Weather Channel, to ask if the Weather Channel was always your kind of destination and where you wanted to end up.
And this is a lesson for any maybe students watching. I always thought the Weather Channel was like the ultimate destination, but I never really thought it was going to be attainable to me, right? And so that's, I think when you're young, and especially back then, I don't think you even realize how many opportunities you have that I didn't even think to try for it until a professor from Penn State, Lee Grency, the internship came open, and it was in Atlanta too, and I was in Pennsylvania, and he said, you should apply for this. And I was like, me? No, I would never get it. And but I was a hard worker, and I proved myself, at school. And so I proved myself through the interview process and did get it and did get the internship at the Weather Channel, and figured out how to move to Atlanta for the summer. And then while I was here, I figured out that I loved it. And this was indeed my, the place that I wanted to be. We had a test that everyone took at the time, and I still probably do, a pre-hire test. It was very difficult. And so I knew about this. So I did my summer internship, and then I, went back to school. And then during my spring break that year, I went back down to Atlanta and said, I want to take that test now. So I want to be ready. Should a job open up when I graduate from Penn State, I want to be ready. And I took the test. I obviously passed, and it just worked out. Actually, the timing was awesome that there was a job available when I graduated, and was able to start June 1st after my graduation from Penn State here at the Weather Channel. And I have been here ever since, in many different roles, actually.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear a little bit more about those subsequent roles, but I wanted to get to a question from Jocelyn. She was wondering what your favorite weather phenomenon is.
Oh, it's hard to pick, because I am really fascinated about all of them. I'm definitely awestruck by tornadoes, but I would not call that my favorite at all. I would say the one that I most like to forecast is probably hurricanes. I happen to love tropical weather, but I'm just very intrigued how some develop into these monsters and some don't. And there's always so much to learn, but the fact that we've made such advances in track forecasting, and even in intensity forecasting, and really in my career in the last 10 years, it really seems most notable. So that's exciting to me as well. Hard to pick
Yeah,
a
that's
favorite
it.
though.
Yeah, it is. Just the dynamism is fantastic.
Right. Right.
Kevin is asking what the most memorable storm is that you've been in the field for.
Uh, they've written, I mean, they've all memorable. Some in studio are just as memorable because you have access to everything happening. When you are in the field, you're just really in your silo, in the weather that you are um encountering. But most memorable was probably Hurricane Matthew, which um I can't remember the date. It was in the mid 2010s, teens. Um, I was, and that was my first hurricane actually at that point in the field. Um, and I was in Daytona Beach, and the models had a beeline of Matthew, which was a Cat 5, right to Daytona Beach. And, I remember we were over on the beach side, we were over the over the bridge. And I remember talking to my producer saying, I think we should go on the other side. I'm not sure we should be right here. And, she had done a lot. She's very experienced. She'd done a lot of storms. And she's like, no, we're in a good building. We've got a good place. And we were, and we would have been. But as it turns out, it went just off the coast from us. 80 miles from us is where Matthew, and we got, I guess the top peak winds were up in the 90s nearby, which was still tough, but we didn't get Cat 5 winds. But the night before, I remember calling Jim Cantori, and he wanted to be where I was. He was down the road in somewhere near Miami, and he wanted to, be right at landfall. So it was exciting, but you know, definitely put into perspective the risks and everything that you need to think about when picking a location. Do you have sturdy structure? What happens if you need to get out afterwards? Will the bridges be available? That all of that goes into play and goes through your mind. It's not just, prepare for the forecast and for communicating the weather, prepare for all the logistics too. And there's a team that helps us, but it's no doubt you're the meteorologist, so you're, ultimately the final answer.
Yeah, no, it's amazing to think about all those logistics, and homeowners have to go through their own, and
Mhm.
everybody's preparing in these different ways. But to think of the people who report the weather and who are providing those, especially as you've been doing from the heart of the storm, just doing your own preparedness, that's an incredible job in itself. So I wanted to ask you about your work modernizing actually those weather warning delivery systems.
Right. So I started at the Weather Channel doing graphics, data graphics, and some forecasting. And then eventually my career, and I was not on air at the time, my career evolved into our science and strategy team. Because at the time, I mean, everything was really still kind of primitive in TV, meteorology, weather broadcasting world. We had a computer system with like a um, light pad and a little pen that I would basically trace the maps, and the temperatures get extracted from the colors that I drew. So, the drawing really affected the temperature. As good as my drawing was, that's as good as your temperature forecast was. And in things with our data too, we're not completely automated. And one thing that was not automated was getting warnings to consumers with their cell phones. What was pagers actually first, to their pagers and then to their cell phones. And we knew it could be automated because I'd been working, with National Weather Service watches and warnings for years, making sure that viewers at cable head ends outside of where the head end, what county they were located in, making sure they could get there. So we knew a lot about how formatted they were. And so that led to me working with our science and strategy team, and as a liaison to the National Weather Service, and helping to communicate between the private sector and the public sector of, making sure that these warnings, which are so critical, are formatted in the best way that they can, are written in the best way that they can be, so that we can easily get them out to our viewers in a timely fashion. And then eventually, in the early 2000s, that led to people getting a tornado warning on their pager, which was something that hadn't happened before. If you didn't have a weather radio, or if you didn't have your TV or radio on, how else would you have gotten a warning? So that really, I thought, revolutionized the way that warnings are disseminated.
Yeah, I was really excited to see that you've done work on that, and just because it
Yeah.
has
Yeah. And that
come
was a
so
really
far.
fun partnership to be a part of, because it's, protection of life and property. That's what it's all about. That's why we all do this. I mean, it's making sure people's lives are safer, easier, more interesting. And so making sure they get those warnings are the most critical piece of the puzzle, I think.
No, it's so I just want to say thank you
Yeah,
for
yeah.
doing that work. It's
Yeah.
yeah, I love seeing how social science and everything is being brought into those warnings now and how they continue to evolve. But
Yeah, and they
it's
really
great.
do. Yeah. And now it seems like with the National Weather Service, goals are to try to consolidate things and make it less confusing. It's all about communication at the end of the day, and that's the most challenging part of the job. I mean, weather forecasting is challenging, yes, but making sure the right message gets out there is just as challenging.
Absolutely. So we had a question from Michael about working at the Weather Channel. Was your goal to be an on-camera meteorologist? And when was your first live appearance on the Weather Channel?
At Penn State, I did a little bit of on-camera stuff with our campus weather service, and I did make a demo tape. I sent it out to two stations. One was in North Dakota. One was it was in Fargo. And the other one was in Savannah. Never heard back from either. And didn't really think that that was going to be my route. I really liked forecasting and science and data and all of that. And I did it just because I, thought that I should. But when I got to the Weather Channel, after about a year or two, I learned more about our apprenticeship program that we had at that time. And so I still worked my day job 5 days a week, but then for an additional 1 or 2 days, depending on what was available, I would do a couple of hours on air overnight. And it was a training program. And I did this usually 1 day a week, sometimes 2 days a week, in addition to my regular job. And then I would sit down with one of our leaders to get some feedback on how I was doing, what I could do better. And it could or could not lead to anything. There was no guarantees in the apprenticeship program, but it was a really neat opportunity. And I think it not only led to my full-time job that I have today, but it made me a better communicator in my other job too. So I really see a lot of benefit out of that, obviously, because it led me to where I am now. I did that for 5 years though. So I basically did my regular job plus the apprenticeship for 5 years.
Samantha has a follow-up to ask what your favorite course was in college.
Oh, favorite course in college. Oh, I like them all. Dr. Shire and cloud physics. I remember that one. I like that a lot. I love clouds. I love just meteorology 401, which is just all the synoptic meteorology and all the basics. And, it really tied together a lot of things I'd observed. And that's one thing I always tell future meteorologists when they say, what should they do? Like keep a log, observe the world around you. And now it's even easier because you can observe the world online anywhere and see some of the most exciting weather. And so just noticing trends and patterns really helps you learn about how the atmosphere works and sometimes why things happen. And especially on a local level, how intricacies in the local topography or rivers or whatnot can really influence the weather. And so that class, I'm going to call that my favorite. That really tied everything together.
Yeah, we've been hearing from a lot of the weather band members about their weather stations at home and how much that's changed kind of their own view of the weather, and also the difficulties they have in citing the weather stations to get like good readings.
I was going to comment on that when you said the weather stations at home, like, yes, but I can't get a good wind observation out of it because it's set in our backyard, which it's in a clear area. There's no trees directly around it, but in general, my backyard has trees surrounding. So I'm never getting any good wind. A thunderstorm will blow through and I swear the wind has to be like 45 miles per hour. And I register like 20. So one day I'll get a good wind observation.
I was going to ask what if you had a weather station at home, and if so, what equipment you had. But
yeah, I've got the Davis Vantage View. I bought it actually for my husband about maybe 15 years ago, and just recently we had to upgrade a few parts, but we've had it for a long time.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, the where to cite the anemometer and get the wind readings is always a common topic.
But it's a game changer for radar for rain collection, because I used to have I had two different rain gauges. I had just the standard one, with the outside cylinder, and the skinny one inside. And so then that would fill up, then you had to always go out and dump it. And and if you miss a couple days and you have a lot of rain, all of a sudden, you're missing rain. And then I had a RainWise one that was a tipping bucket, which was fun and exciting, but I don't think it was as accurate as just measuring it yourself. So now I feel like I've got it covered. I've got really good rain data. And that's so useful to water, to not to water. If you're on vacation, so I need to turn on the sprinklers, how much rain you had. And I sent it out to my neighborhood, actually. So it's like, if you guys need to know, here's our neighborhood rain gauge.
It's fantastic. Yeah. See, so many benefits to having your own personal weather station.
I think so.
All right, we've got a good cluster of storm questions now that I wanted to get to.
Okay.
So Eugene is asking, is there a severe weather event that you were involved with that gave you your biggest interest in warning forecasting?
I mean, in terms of providing warnings, that's something that, when I got into meteorology, and just from watching so much Weather Channel, I knew that was an important part of it to me, that making sure that the warnings were accurately and efficiently communicated, because that's a big part of why people watch the weather. But I also think people watch the weather to learn too, because if you have a fear of thunderstorms, or a fear of any kind of weather, I think sometimes understanding what's happening can help a little bit ease those fears, and understanding the timing and how the atmosphere works and moves and all of that. So that definitely, helped fuel my interest in working with the warning system and communication of that. But just to give the one weather pattern that would probably stick out the most in recent years would have been the super outbreak. That morning I was on air, I was working with, it was Dr. Nab and Stephanie Abrams and Al Roker. It was a Wake Up with Al. I remember that morning, and we were on air, and the dew points were in the 80s in Alabama and in April. And that was like something that was a big pointer. Just something is going to be bad today. I mean, it's ever hard to forecast a record-breaking event like that, but all signs were pointing to what an extreme day that was going to be, and that was what was my first indication. Those high dew points.
All right, taking note of the dew points here. And they're high importance for everything. Okay, Paul is asking, so the WMO recommends that storm warnings are conveyed with one voice from one shift duty to the next. And he was wondering if you work on that at all, if you try to ensure that there are similar communications or similar types of warnings that go out from one shift to the next.
Oh, 100% at the Weather Channel. I mean, first of all we do is talk about the weather. And so when there is, one show transitioning to the next one, there's always a communication around, this is active right now. This is what you need to look at on the radar, because whoever's on air at the moment obviously is looking the most closely at what's happening at the moment. And, that is definitely a sort of, notes to the next shift, but it normally happens verbally. We're just talking about it.
Following up on that, Gail has a question. Do you have an elevator speech to people who say that meteorologists are usually wrong?
Sort of. Yeah, you get it must be fun to get paid and be wrong 50% of the time. And I just run through the list of other jobs where it's okay to be wrong. And it's okay to be wrong. We all need to accept that. It's not about being wrong. It's about giving the best information that you have at the time. I'm never mailing it in or trying to take a shortcut when it comes to providing a weather forecast here. And none of us are. We're all just using the best of the information that we have. And so, it's I think not about, and you look at a doctor, you look at a lawyer, like there's sometimes not an exact answer. It's a work in progress.
Good elevator speech.
Yeah.
Also, just that communication you were talking about before and the importance of it. It's just, I really appreciate how much meteorologists work on that. Let's see. So little bit more into specifics, Astrid is wondering what you think of this year's hurricane season.
This was an interesting one. We just wrapped it up yesterday, the end of hurricane season, and we were above average, got made it all the way through the list, 21 named storms, all the way to Wanda. And that was not unanticipated. What surprised me about this hurricane season was how many uninteresting storms there were. So you can't discount when you have big ones like Ida, and even some of them, the smaller, let's say smaller, but then the ones that didn't make headlines like Ida did, but Fred and Henri, they still had impacts and they still caused damage. And even some of the, like, I'm thinking of, maybe it was Fred who made landfall in the Florida Panhandle. And I remember thinking that there was not going to be much damage. And then I was watching the cameras and the water levels were coming up. And, it was mainly just closer to the coast that saw it. But there was surge issues and surge damage. And so you can never discount any storm because they all bring their own different flavor, of risk. So I would say this season was a good reminder that, to sort of treat every season with its own level of respect. It doesn't matter if it's expected to be a big season or an inactive season, because even an inactive season, if it only has one storm, if it's an Ida or if it's an Andrew, then of course it's going to be memorable.
And following up on that, Jocelyn is asking, what predictions do you have for this winter, especially looking at the Northeast?
That is the $1 million question. Everybody always wants to know, what's the winter going to be like? We are in La Nina. And so a La Nina pattern would favor an active northwest, which we've already seen happening. And so that looks like it's playing out. When you look at, all of the indications right now, it looks like in general warmer than average for a lot of the country, maybe with the exception of the northern Rockies or Northwest. And that doesn't mean we're not going to get snow, because I think that's probably her question. Are we going to get big snowstorms? Even if we're above average in January or February, you're still probably in snow territory, right? Because averages are cold in the winter. Plus, not every single day is going to be above average. The way you get averages are some are high and some are low. In the case of an above average winter, you might just have more days that are above average. So you're not going to nail me down on what do I think exactly about this winter, but it's, it does look like the trend will be the Northwest active. Where those storms track after that, do they give us an active, clipper season through the Midwest? That seems likely. What happens once they get to the Northeast? That's going to depend a lot on, what happens as we get through the winter. I think there's less teleconnection to a La Nina pattern in the Northeast than in the Northwest.
All right, Jean was wondering if you get to work with the Storm Prediction Center in person.
I have not. That would be a goal of mine, actually, to go out and do some live reports from the Storm Prediction Center, especially in a busy situation, to see how it all works. I'm sure it's a well-oiled machine.
That would be great to get a peek inside their operations,
for
sure. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that national perspective, and because you have such a passion for weather, and I can hear it just talking with you about the whole patterns across the US and around the world. But how do you do you look at ways to communicate to like all different places within the US about their weather, and how to kind of drill into the interests and weather patterns in specific places? How do you think about that, and how do you work with that?
That's a good question. And that is a hard challenge because, you only have so much time, and we know our viewers are coming in and out. We want to make sure we hit the top stories. And so, on the Weather Channel, we do try to focus on what are the biggest impact situations. And that's what we will communicate the most about. And so when you look at, a big storm hitting the Central Plains, that might be what we talk about primarily. However, there's other little small stories that might, get smaller amounts of time throughout the show. And sometimes it's hard. That might be a personal interest of mine. Like today, there was some really interesting downsloping winds happening in Montana. The temperatures were, by 6 a.m. hitting record high levels. We just didn't have a place to fit it in the show today. And we tried so hard, actually. And we talked about it, but and we had actually planned for it, but then something happened and we ran out of time. And so that's just life. And so we really do, though, try to hit the biggest impact weather. And so in terms of communication, it's like, how can we reach the most people that would be affected by the weather that's happening out there today? And it is across the nation. We cover some interesting stories around the world, actually, when severe weather strikes. And it's making sure that we can give the important stories the due diligence that they deserve.
Yeah, must be a tough act to juggle all of that. That's really incredible. Kevin is wondering how amateur weather watchers and enthusiasts can help professional meteorologists with forecasting and for severe weather and other events.
Well, especially today with social media, and this is what I love the most about social media, is the interaction that we get with people around the country and around the world. Pictures of what is happening in the weather are so useful. Observations and just, the temperature, what's happening outside, that is so useful. If it's, if it's interesting to you as a viewer, is also really useful, because I know what interests me, but I don't necessarily know what interests the viewer. It's not necessarily going to be the same thing. And so that connection that we can get on social media is essential, actually, I feel like, to broadcast these days. It's something that I didn't have, even 5 years ago. It really wasn't as well developed as it is right now. And, I'd come in and do my show on the Weather Channel, and I'd get my models, and I'd get, the observations from our data system. And that was all I really had. Some local news stations might have a website that was up to date, but most didn't. And so we really didn't have that connection the way we do today to find out exactly, how people are caring about the weather where they are. Do they like it? Do they not? We want to know.
With all those this experience you've had over your career, we talked a little bit about those warning systems. I was wondering what else you've seen evolve and change, with that going along the lines of the social media changes that you've seen, and what stuck out to you about the changes, and if there are any big surprises.
A lot of automation has happened since I started. Both in the way forecasts are created and the way graphics are created as well. Graphics used to really be a very manual process, down to one of my jobs used to be drawing the fronts on maps, which was really fun. I mean, I really miss map analysis, where we would draw the isobars, we would put the highs, put the lows. And that was one of the first things when I started at the Weather Channel, I would videotape with my VCR, the Weather Channel, because that was my high pressure that I placed on that map. And that was so exciting to me. And so now that kind of stuff can be automated. And so the creation of the graphics, the forecast, I mentioned this earlier, but the forecast that you saw on the Weather Channel was different from the forecast that you saw on the website. And that was also different than the forecast you saw on your local on the 8s. Back when I started, you would get 3 different forecasts with the same brand. And so it's all now today, thanks to automation, all the same. And I was actually a part of that team that helped automate the forecast, because we were using the National Weather Service worded forecast on the local on the 8s. And so that's how we got, that famous local on the 8s forecast. And we were trying to automate that with our own forecast. And so basically we took like a genome of every possible weather combination: partly cloudy in the morning, mostly cloudy in the afternoon, partly cloudy in the morning, rain in the afternoon, partly cloudy in the morning, heavy rain in the afternoon. You get the drift. And then we wrote worded forecasts to that. And so I was part of the team. This is back before I was on air full time. I was part of the team that just wrote down iterations of what the forecast would be. And they're all handwritten at one point. And then somebody read them. Cantori.
That's fantastic. I didn't know those were all handwritten, and those variations.
It was a very manual process.
Well, Jen is asking, what are you most looking forward to with the continued advancement of weather science?
The thing that I am most looking forward to actually is has to do with communication, and it is figuring out how to better communicate uncertainty. And this was a question actually I posed to my team the other day. Is like, how good can weather forecasts get? Because we are limited by some processes in the atmosphere, right? Clouds forming, rain forming, that's going to affect the weather in a local area. And then when it does, how does that affect the weather downstream? And will the models ever be able to encapsulate that? Because how are you going to get a perfect forecast coming out when it's nearly impossible to completely capture the current conditions everywhere at every time, at every moment? I mean, we all have phones and watches on us, and I'm sure there's ways we could do better than we are right now with capturing what's happening everywhere. But to know every single air molecule of what it's doing and then forecast that forward, that still feels like it's going to be a challenge. So to get to perfection might not be the end result, but I think what will bring us closer to a perceived perfection in the eyes of consumers is better communication of the uncertainty. How do you better communicate a chance of snow? That's the easy one that we all know needs work on. But even communicating, what is the chance of getting to 90 today? Would that be useful to you, right? And there's definitely ways that we could better do that.
That's a great, Lenny was actually asking how important you think the role of communicating uncertainty in the forecast is. So
yeah. Yeah, no, very, very. And I know it's not at all sexy, and everybody wants one answer. What's today's forecast? Sunny and 75. Okay, I'm done. That's all, you wanted to show up on your phone and you want to give it 3 seconds, but sometimes the weather takes more than that. And so we have to figure out how to package it up better so that somebody does want to listen and will get the takeaway that they need actually to make their day safer, better, easier, more interesting. That's always my goal in, pulling together a weather forecast and broadcast.
Yeah, I had a friend complaining to me that there were no good traveling forecasts, that they were having trouble, looking for weather in one place and how they were going to get from point A to point B and what the weather would be in between. So from a consumer point of view, there's always these little tweaks, it seems like, that can be made. Yeah. And getting back to that communication that you were talking about, just
right,
giving the forecast, but how it's received and where it's received is really important as well.
Yeah. And just, that's a great example, because that's something that we talk about travel weather a lot in the Weather Channel, because we do think that's really useful. People need that. But then it's like drilling down to your specific timing. I mean, I can give you the forecast, but what you want to know is I'm leaving at 8 and I need to know what's going to happen between 8 and 12 and on these roads, and so drilling down to that level of detail is hard to do when you're covering weather on a national basis.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that fine grain to larger grain is always such a conundrum. So it's really exciting to see, these community scientists, citizen scientists contributing to those, your home weather stations contributing to those smaller scale pieces as well. Yeah. I'm looking forward to how those get incorporated into other places. So yeah, Jocelyn was asking about that as well. If she was wondering if you would expand on some recent developments in meteorological forecasting and what developments you might hope for to improve forecasts in the future.
Most of the developments these days are in modeling, and there was a big upgrade to the American model, the GFS, and it really seems to have made some good improvements. And so I think that's where there will continue to be improvements. I mean, we don't model the atmosphere perfectly either. And is perfection there attainable? I don't know, but it's always trying to, search for that and search for improvement and better precision. I think there'll continue to be improvements in automation too, pulling in more inputs into the forecast, which ultimately will produce a better forecast in the end. And the community is really just 3 parts. It's better sampling of the atmosphere. That's the pulling in the inputs, improving the models, and then the communication at the end of the day. If you make a better forecast, but nobody can get it, that's, pointless. And so it's the communication part of it.
Yes, we had also a couple questions just more about your specific job and experiences. So when you're in Atlanta, Dave is wondering what percentage of your work is off camera.
Let's see. I mean, almost half, actually. Actually, no, probably more than half these days. But there's a lot of time I spend an hour or two briefing myself in the morning, looking at the weather. And not just looking at the weather, but looking at social media weather, which gives me some perspective on what people are thinking. So that's useful too. The first thing I do though is I go through satellite radar. My tabs come up on my computer right away when I boot it up. So I've got the radar, the satellite, the models. I like to look at the upper air, the surface map from the Weather Prediction Center that they have an interactive one that you can zoom in and look at all the obs. So I do that first thing every day. And then and look at the watches and warnings. And then I dig around on Twitter, and Twitter is one of my favorite sources, and just see what are people saying about the weather. If there's a big storm, I'll do a hashtag search on that part of the country and just look to see what videos are out there, and that really helps tell the story and allows me to see what other people are seeing who are actually dealing with the weather.
Did
And
you
then we
pull
always
from, sorry.
we work together to plan the show, and then after the show we work together to plan ahead for the next day, so it's a constant planning process.
Did you pull it all from social media, or like change any of your segments to focus on what people might be saying or talking about?
I wouldn't say I'd change anything, but I might throw in some things because of it, but there've been a few times where I've noticed something getting a lot of interest on social media, like, hey, we better look at this. And sometimes it's, things like a meteor. I mean, those bubble up, earthquakes bubble up right away on social media too.
Mark is asking if you've noticed over your time at the Weather Channel that the number of applications for entry-level jobs has increased. So I guess if people are more interested in weather jobs.
Well, I'm not involved with the application, so I don't know that. But we have a good crew of meteorologists at the Weather Channel, and people do leave for other jobs and new ones come in, and I feel like everyone sort of has the same feeling when they are in the Weather Channel. It's like, wow, this is a family. I mean, we really are. It's a great place to work. Everyone works hard. We're scrappy to get things done, and if you need anything, you just ask. Everyone is more than willing to help. And when I say that, I mean help with like advice on why is this happening. We have a lot of questions, like, look at the radar, why is this happening, what do you think's happening here? And so there's a lot of weather expertise in the building, and it's very widely shared.
Sounds like a fantastic team. Rick is asking about mentorship and what if there are any good qualities of mentorship that you might look for, especially for women who are pursuing STEM careers.
At mentorship. Yes, my mentors over the years I would say most of them have had a similar personality, which included work ethic. I believe in hard work, and so I guess I'm most likely to work with others who feel the same way, but also risk takers and giving it a try. You never know until you try. And when it comes to on air, Alexandra Steele actually was someone who right away took me under her wing when I first started full time, and she talked a lot about confidence to me, and she's like, have the confidence, and she's like, you'll grow into it. And so that has really stuck with me, and something I think about, because in new situations where I would get nervous, public speaking, which is different than TV speaking, I always think about her advice.
So in terms of that kind of the team at the Weather Channel, when there's an emergency, Eugene is wondering if what happens when there's an emergency situation. Is more staff called in? Do you guys shift roles?
Oh yeah, but you know what? When there's bad weather, everybody wants to be there, so it's usually not that difficult. When there's And we know during hurricane season and during winter storm season that, there's a good chance you're working weekends, or extra longer shifts, or even, doing stuff off camera, even when you're not on camera, to help out the team around you. And so it's just that kind of team environment. But usually when there's a hurricane, there's a line of people who want to go out and cover it or come in and work it, because this is what we do. This is what we train for, to make sure that we can get the vital warning information out to the public. And so we want to make sure it gets done. Nobody will let anything fall through the cracks.
Have you found a preference for being out in the field or being in the studio?
I really like both. I like being out in the field because it's fun to be in the weather, like just like outside playing, right? Sometimes I'm like, you're paying me to come play in the snow for, a couple hours. But it is really hard work. Being in the field is much harder than anyone, I think, really gets. And it's, unless you're out there, and it's not glamorous by any means. I mean, you're most of the time eating meals from gas stations, or like I'll go to the grocery store first thing, get some avocados and peanut butter, and that might be all I eat for the storm, because power might go out, places might close down, or you just don't have time, because when you're in the field, you spend time traveling to get there, scouting to find the best location, and then the research. I mean, I don't just walk into a city knowing everything about their weather history. I have to learn it, and then usually I have to relearn it every time I go, because again, we're national. And so, my brain is filled. And so I have a very, say, limited amounts of free time when I'm in the field. You're completely consumed. I pretty much work, 18 hours a day, then the other 6 I sleep when I'm in the field, if that. And sometimes you get less than that, just because the weather is what it is. But I enjoy it immensely, and I have a much greater respect for the weather. And I think I'm a better forecaster when I actually see it happening in action. And I'm a better communicator too, when I see how people react to it. At the same time, I do like being in the studio, because I have access to all the information. I can look up the observations anywhere, see the video, and see what's happening. And so I enjoy that part of it. And I enjoy talking to our crews in the field and asking them questions. And I like that part of TV also. So I can't pick.
That's totally fine. Are there any, we touched a little bit on the logistics that you have to do when you're out in the field, but are there any that you find particularly interesting, or anything? Would you talk a little bit more about the logistics that you have to go through
Being
there?
in the field is definitely fun. Finding a location, we have some shots that we kind of come back to in some cities time and time again, but all of us, I know when we go out there, we want to have our own unique spot. And so, I'll spend as much time as I have, really, scouting, around, and my producer will do the same. Sometimes we go together, sometimes we go separate, photographer too, just depends on who's available and what the weather is like, because you can't be driving around in too bad weather. But last year, for the first day of winter, was a year ago today, I went to Cleveland for snow, and they ended up with about a foot of snow. It was 18 inches east of town where I ended up for my live shots the second day. And I spent probably 6 or 7 hours driving around looking for the perfect backdrop that I wanted, because I wanted the Cleveland sign and I wanted the city skyline. And me and my producer went back and forth on, he wanted the shot of these bridges, which is also good. We ended up going with his shot, because we have other things to consider, not just a good backdrop, but we need access to facilities like bathrooms. We need some shelter, especially for the photographer, because if the weather gets too bad, I got to make sure the camera is a way to keep dry. So we just need options when we're in the field. We can't just be in the middle of a field. And so that's part of the challenge in picking a live spot. But it's also exciting, because like when you finally find that perfect spot and then everything comes together, it feels good.
So when you're in the studio as opposed to in the field, it sounds like you have access to a lot more information in the studio. So do you serve as kind of a link and feeding information that you think your field folks will need to know?
And we do try to do that. I mean, now at least with our phones, you have more access in the field than you ever had before, but so you're sort of limited to how much can you search on your phone while you're out there. Maybe you have a signal on your laptop that's good enough. I use my hotspot sometimes, but sometimes it's not strong enough. So that's challenging. So yes, when I'm in studio, whoever's live on my show, I'll send them something if I see it for sure. That, and more so to facilitate what our communication is going to be like. What's our conversation going to be about? So I can send to them and say, this is what I'm going to ask you. And here's the answer. Because I know you can't necessarily look it up while you're in the field.
So is when there's an emergency or a large storm, does that shift your day at all? Does that look a lot
Oh,
different than your normal day at the Weather Channel? Or
it
is it?
can. Yeah, it can, depending on the storm. And sometimes the schedules just go a little bit longer. Sometimes I come in earlier. It really just depends on the storm. It does
Jocelyn
usually
was
mean
just
I get less sleep because I will be up earlier. And then on a big storm day, and this happens to all of us, once we leave work, it's hard to shut it off because we're interested. And so often I will go home and then just watch the Weather Channel and have the computer up next to me looking at all the data. So it is hard to turn it off in a big situation.
I bet it's fascinating to watch those things develop and being so involved with it.
Yeah.
Jocelyn was wondering just if you could walk us through your typical day at the Weather Channel.
Sure. Well, Jocelyn, I just as of the last month, my schedule changed a little bit, but my alarm used to go off at 3. Now it goes off at 5, which is amazing. So I just have to say, sleep in TV, especially morning TV, is hard to come by. And I feel really lucky right now that I'm getting a good night's sleep. But I get up at 5 and I spend I spend about an hour at home just looking at the weather. I feel better when I'm completely briefed in before I come to work. So I feel like I could walk in and do the show, but of course we need to communicate together with the team about how the show is going to go. So I'm briefed before I come in. I do my own hair and makeup at home. And then when I get there, and right now my coworker, Alex Wallace, we get together with our weather producer and with our team show producer and also with our executive producer and just talk about how the show is going to go, what is going to be the top couple weather stories that we will focus on, how we're going to do that with what weather graphics and what video we have. And then, try to thread through some other things. Like we try to do a question of the day on my show every day. So we always do actually work hard to try to make that topical, whether it's pop culture topical or weather topical, we try to tie both together. And then it's always a scramble at the last minute, no matter how prepared we are, 3 minutes before the show, we're all running around, making sure everything is, mics are on and everything is set. But somehow we end up in the right spot every day when the camera starts rolling. And then it's a work in progress. We will make changes to the rundown as the show goes on. Sometimes the whole thing gets thrown out when the weather gets really bad. And that's just how it goes in live TV. And then after the show, we'll work together to talk about the next day, planning some segments, and then do any research that we need to do for those segments. And then even looking ahead to the following weeks so that if there's interviews that need to be scheduled, that type of thing can be organized.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that behind the scenes look at everything that you do and working at the Weather Channel. So we've gone for about an hour. So I think really appreciate you sharing all this time and information with us. And thank you, audience, for all your great questions.
Yeah, thank you all for being here and for the questions. I appreciate it.
So I think with that, we'll say a huge thank you, Jen. So appreciate you spending your time with the Weather Band.
Karen, thank you.
Just have a great rest of your day, everyone.